David Glasser, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Thunder. What's up?
Uh, you, you're what's up, man?
Man, great to be here, and thank you so much, man, for including me in this stellar lineup of musician interviews. It's quite flattering and quite an honor. I thank you.
Well, I had to get, uh, I had to get the lead alto from the Basie band. I mean, that's 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 required. Um, it, man, I just I want to go back and well, first, I want to ask you, how's your family doing?
I appreciate that, man. I was thinking about your family as well, and yeah, we're doing okay. I think as most people, we're trying to adjust to this. My two boys are 17 and 15. So they've made some adjustments with this online learning thing has been a challenge for them to be self motivated and to manage their time and to study and take care of their business. So I think there's been some lessons learned there, and there's been some adjustments and some challenges, but we're doing pretty good. My wife works in healthcare, so she hasn't been on the front lines, but she has been just have to go to the VA hospital, and she has to work there. So you know, and we've been doing good. We're holding it together, man. How about you? How's that little one doing?
Moses is doing great. He's bouncing off the walls and stuff, and he misses his friends and stuff. Him, and my wife are, uh, they're definitely extroverts,
Mhm.
and so I think this has had a different effect on them. I'm introverted, so
Mhm.
um, I like people. I and you know and I miss people and stuff, and but I could kind of lock myself in the basement and you know just do more work for a while and kind of distract myself from things.
Yeah, man,
But
totally identify with that, man. I'm the same way. I often struggle with too much external stimuli. Like I like to have my solitude. I need space. I need time to just do my thing, whether it's practicing my flute or getting underneath my car or whatever it is, and
yeah,
I think I can identify with that. I think it is challenging. My son Coleman is he's very I think his relationships with his friends are very important to him, and so it's been difficult for him.
yeah, in Ohio they opened, well, not all of the gyms, only the gyms that could comply with the mandate, with the specifics of the proper cleaning and creating a socially distanced experience and all of that. But I want to say it was 3 weeks ago today that they opened the gyms back up,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you, I missed the gym. I missed it so bad. I mean, probably the thing I missed the most was playing. Being on the stage and playing
Yeah,
for
definitely.
audience. That was probably the thing I missed the most. And then, secondly, I missed the gym, and it was just so. It's been great to be back there. I kind of feel like my equilibrium is a little more balanced again. And I totally the whole thing, having some space and some time by yourself to collect your thoughts, and yeah, so I get
Yeah,
that.
definitely, definitely.
So let's talk about how we met. Um, let's see, how many years ago was it? 3 years ago, um, maybe 4 years ago.
I'm not sure if it was that long ago. Maybe time flies, man. It does seem it does seem to be at least a couple 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like about 3 years. So I was subbing in the Basie band playing alto two, and it was at a venue in Cleveland. What's the name of that? That
Oh, it's terrible that I can't remember. Is it jazz? Yeah, it's terrible. I'm embarrassed, man. I hope the cat does.
No, no. It's okay. It's okay. The name is going to come back. It'll come back to us
Let's look.
as we're talking.
Yeah,
It's
it
all
might.
right. But it's like a supper club,
Yeah,
and that was my first experience playing with the Basie band. One thing, I know folks that play in the band, and they always talked about, this, nobody plays the blues like the Basie band. And of course, I've listened to a lot of recordings. I mean, you have to, in the position I'm in, you have to have listened to a lot of recordings of the Basie band. And it's always killing. It was always killing. But I'll tell you, there's nothing like sitting in that, sitting in the seat in the band. Just the way that that kind of experience. It really was really highlight playing in that band with you. So I was playing the second alto, and you were playing lead alto, and then Doug Lawrence, who I interviewed for this series, also he's sitting on the other side of me, and you all were so kind and gracious, and pointing out every pitfall. you know, well, every situation, because the book is old,
yeah,
and sometimes it's not as legible, and then sometimes stuff is just totally not what's on the page.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and you all were just like, hey, watch out for this and check this thing out here, and so I really appreciate that. I had such a great time,
Well, man, it
and
was so great having you. You're such a phenomenal player. I remember that too, man. I think you stood up and played on. I think it was probably Basie Power, man, when you were playing this real fast blues, and man, you must have played 10 choruses, man. And Scotty was just blown away, man. He's like, man, I think I can't even repeat what he said, but. You were really taking care of business, man, and it was a pleasure to meet you then and to have you in the band. And I remember telling Scotty, man, this cat take care of business, because you came in, you read the book, and like you said, there's a lot of stuff in there that has evolved over the years in terms of how the music is interpreted and phrased. And like you said, a lot of times it is not what is on the page, and everybody just kind of knows it and doesn't really think twice about it. So it's not an easy thing to come in and sit in that band. I remember when I first played with the band, I also was playing the second alto chair. This would have been back in '89 and '90, and like yourself, man. I mean, I love this music, man. I've listened to lots and lots of records, man, and um, and when I joined the band, and I'm playing in the section with Danny Turner and Johnny Williams, Kenny Hing, Eric Dixon, and I'm like, man, why can't I play with these cats, man? Like, I mean, why am I not exactly with them, And for me, it took, really, I felt like after about 3 weeks, suddenly it was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, it happened. And I don't really know, it wasn't anything I did in my mind, it was just, it took that long for me to just be able to phrase in the way they were phrasing, because you can do all your homework, and I think we can't advocate that enough to people. To do all your homework, man. Study up, listen to the music, play along with the records, all of that kind of stuff.
right.
Hang out with the cats, all of that kind of stuff. But it's definitely for me anyway. It was a different experience once I got in the band, and it really took some time. And it does. I think it does for most people. I've heard that story from others as well.
you know, I'll, I definitely, felt the same way. I felt like the when I played with the band. I mean, we did a couple tours,
Yeah. Yeah, we did a couple
and
long tours. Yeah.
yeah, and so when I played with the band more and we had more touch time, you know, uh, then then I felt more comfortable. But you're such a great lead player and so clear with what it is that you're saying, and you have a particular way that you're going to play, and it's so consistent that it made it really easy to follow you. And that's not it's not always the case. I mean, there are some good lead players that aren't necessarily super consistent. They may play things in a different way or whatever, but you just so clear with what it was that you were doing, and so accurate that it made it very obvious where everything was.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, I mean, of course, I know. I think any alto player such as yourself who plays in big bands and many other things, you know, it's always such an honor and a privilege, really, to try to carry on the great tradition of lead alto playing. Um, and it's great to hear you say that because I don't always feel that I'm doing that great a job. But certainly, it's something I strive to do. I'm kind of a spontaneous person, and I really attach myself to the feeling of the moment. So sometimes I feel like I do things a little bit differently um, from day to day, but I guess it's not too different, so that's good. And you know, you certainly were great, man, at latching right on, and that's so important when you're playing in the section. You know, I think playing lead alto, like I said, man, the people who inspired me for lead alto, I would say, obviously Marshall Royal. Um, Probably earlier than that was Johnny Hodges, and then I later found out that it was Russell Prokop who did a lot of the lead playing in the Basie band. I played a lot of the lead parts. I think it's back and forth, but and then another one who's really important to me that a lot of people don't think about too much is Willie Smith. And if I've listened to a lot of Willie Smith with Lunsford's band, and then also some of the later things that he did with behind Nat King Cole with the Billy May Orchestra, and he worked also with the Harry James Orchestra. And you know, and then I mean, you get to a point where you just kind of just have to play what you hear, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it to me it comes out of that. I don't really try to play like one person or another. I think in the Basie band, to me, oh, I left out one very important person, Earl Warren. Earl Warren, the first lead out player in the Basie band. So I think those four, I guess it was that I mentioned, four or five, really the most influential on me. But again, um, you know, you get to a point where you're just listening to the band around you, and you know, you listen to the trumpet player, first trumpet player, and the first trombone player, and you listen to the rhythm section, and you just playing the music the way you hear it and the way you feel it. And I do believe very deeply in the expression of the music, the swing, the inflection, the dynamics. I do believe those things are so important to emotional expression, and I really try to focus a lot on. You know, I think those are the things that I'm always. Uh, those are the things that are presenting the challenges for me as a saxophonist, in terms of being able to have the control to be able to use all of those devices efficiently and clearly and consistently.
Yeah, you're a real, you know, in our conversations, I knew this, you know, right off. You're a real historian. You really understand the tradition. And, you know, obviously with your teaching position, obviously it's important to know that. But, I mean, you really take that really seriously as far as the way that you play, you know, all of the tradition that I hear in your playing. Can you talk maybe about some influences? I mean, you talked about a bunch of players that I know have been influences on your lead playing. How about as far as some of your maybe more creative and you know, improvisation?
Sure. I mean, I grew up. I grew up, I got exposed to this music first by a good friend of mine, also a saxophone player named Pavel Carey, whose father was a jazz pianist named Cecil Young, and he had a lot of records. This was been in junior high school, and I first got exposed through him to Dexter Gordon. Dexter Gordon was one of my first loves. I got to see him at the Village Vanguard as a teenager with the band, the Homecoming Band, with Woody Shaw, Ronnie Matthews, Lewis Hayes, and I think it was maybe Stafford James. I'm not sure who the bass player was anymore. I'd have to look it up. But so that was one of my first influences. I also was very influenced at a young age by Coltrane and Cannonball and Charlie Parker. And those were like the early Phil Woods as well. And my first funny story, my parents didn't know anything about jazz at all. So when I got into jazz, I was practicing a lot, and my father wanted to get me a teacher. So he didn't really know anything about jazz, but my father was in civil liberties. He worked at the time as an executive director for the American Civil Liberties Union, and as such, he knew pretty well Nat Hentoff, who was a writer, and he wrote quite a lot of liner notes on records and books on jazz and other things, civil liberties and whatnot. So anyway, he was over at the house, and my father said, "Listen, my son wants to play jazz saxophone. Would you know of anybody who might be a good teacher?" And so Nat recommended Lee Konitz. So know who he was at the time. So my father said, "Listen, I spoke to Nat, and he recommended that I get you some private lessons with this saxophone player, Lee Konitz. Apparently, he's quite well known. This is what my father said to me, and I didn't know who he was, but I was kind of scared, because I thought, oh man, this might be some heavy cat. You know what I mean? So anyways, I started studying with him at about 15. Okay, and I took some lessons. And I would say, in terms of creativity, a lot of the things that he exposed me to at that time, the importance of melody, the importance of sort of being creative with the melody, were really, as I look back now, I see how important they were. After the first lesson, he said to me, he said, "Now, Dave," he said, "on your way home, I want you to stop at the record store, and I want you to buy a Charlie Parker album. I want you to take that home and listen to it." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Is there a particular album that you'd like me to buy?" He said, "Anyone you want, doesn't matter. He never made a bad record." And so I brought home, so I did. I bought the album. I bought was actually turned out to be kind of rare for a while. It was a 1949 Christmas Eve concert with Red Rodney and Bird and Roy Haynes, Al Haig, probably Tommy Potter. I listened to it. I thought, oh, this sounds kind of strange. It's a little hard for me to understand it at that time, but I kept listening to it. And when I would go to subsequent lessons, I remember coming in, and I could tell this story because people, think of Lee Konitz, as sort of this very individual, unique kind of inventive player, which he certainly was. But it's interesting, as a teacher, when I would walk into his apartment, I walked into his apartment, and he was sitting there playing along with Charlie Parker, playing along with the record, with Charlie Parker playing Out of Nowhere, note for note, right with him. And I remember I told him, I said, "Listen, man," I said, I was 15. I said, "Well, I want to be an innovator, like John Coltrane. I want to be." And he just kind of chuckled, and he said, "Well, Dave," he said, "if you're going to be an innovator, nothing's going to stop that." He said, "What you need to do is you need to listen to some Lester Young. You need to learn how to play this music. Then you can see where we can go from there." So there were some important lessons. I didn't study with him very, very much because he ended up traveling so often that I studied with him when he was available over the course of sort of my high school years. So that's sort of, like I said, he was never one of my main influences or even one of the people that I really listened to that much. But it's interesting to look back and to see that I think in many ways he had a profound influence on my creativity and my improvisational approach. Um, but John Coltrane, Bird, those guys. I also, I spent a lot of time listening to other instruments as well. In group play, I really loved that group with Coltrane and McCoy and Elvin Jones for many, many, many years. A lot of records I wore out with that group. Um, Hank Jones, Art Tatum, Bud Powell. A lot of pianists I've spent a lot of time listening to. So those are a lot of the people that have influenced me improvisationally. And I would also say that it's interesting to. I'm a strong believer that music is music. Music is to me, well, it can be many things. It can be, it can uh, be for dancing. It can be for celebration. It can be for ritual. It can be for spirituality. It can be art. It can be for just entertainment, listening. I think that any kind of music, to me, is about connecting with people. The transference of emotion between the audience and the performers. And so stylistically, I like to say this because like we're talking about Basie, and I love that music, and I love playing that music. Um, but I also, like to play in many different kinds of contexts. So even what people call free improvisation. I mean, to me,
Hmm.
it's pretty much the same idea, right? It's the organization of sound and time and space with the objective of cohesion, continuity, and expression, transference with the audience. So I always like to. I feel like to me, the ideal musician is the person who can use his ears and his skills that he's developed, his or her obviously, to find a place and find a place within the whole of the music. Find something to make the music grow and make the music thrive. And that'll be something different in different contexts. But I think that that's an important thing for me.
Yeah, you know what is inherent to that, and of course, when we're young, we don't realize as much. It's like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And but unless you want to be reinventing the wheel all the time, you have to study what already exists so you can even make the decision on which direction you want to go into as far as where there's actually some space for you to be an individual as opposed to just thinking that you're doing something new but it's already been done before.
I totally agree. I totally agree on that, and I believe that I believe that history informs creativity. I believe that if you know I've had that experience where young students have said to me, man, I don't want to learn all this old stuff, man. I want to be, I want to do my own thing, man. I want to be creative. I said, okay, well, that's cool, man. Um, but here's the thing, like, how do you really know if what you're doing is new unless you know everything else that has already happened, which is probably impossible, quite honestly, to know everything,
Mm.
but you get my point, right?
Right, 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 right.
Um, and so, if that's the case, we must remember that ignorance is nothing new. So, if you're going to choose to not learn something, then you have to ask yourself how that's really helping you. If the learning of history somehow prevents you from being creative yourself, that isn't the history's fault. You know what I mean? That's not knowledge. I don't believe knowledge should be detrimental to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the knowledge of something, you may disagree with things, you may learn about what you do not want to do or what you do, that's all
Right, right, right.
full. But knowledge, and I challenge my students, I said, if you, I said, you may try, but you will have a hard time convincing me that knowledge is detrimental. So with that in mind, why don't we, and furthermore, if you'd like to argue with me about the irrelevance of what I'm asking you to learn, why don't you learn it first so that we can have an informed discussion? Because I think that anytime you oppose a point of view, just generally, not just with music, it's a more productive conversation, debate, whatever you want to call it, if both parties are informed of the history and the positions of the other people. So I'm kind of getting into like a whole nother bag now, but
No, 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 no. I think it's all the same stuff, and
no, I
you know,
agree.
unfortunately, in our national politics, and just politics, period, it's just a lot of talking with
Yeah,
no listening.
absolutely, man.
And it seems that in order for you to be a successful politician at the national level, what is necessary is that you stop listening. That's like prerequisite. Stop listening and do your best to create straw men of arguments or positions that other people take, or to try to make it look like uh, other folks, uh, their motives are really what we should be questioning.
Mhm.
Not just a disagreement on the way that a policy would roll out, but they must just be horrible human beings, and that's why they think that. So it just turns everything into mush, and is a really it's really unfortunate. But that same thing can manifest itself, and I've seen it quite often actually in musicians, where they learned all this stuff to play, but they can't really communicate with someone because they haven't taken enough time to learn or to get inside what the other musicians are into. Uh,
Mhm.
one of the reasons also to really do your research and to do your studying and really know the history, know the tradition, is so that when you go and you play with other musicians, and if they have done the same thing, now you can actually talk.
Mhm.
Now you can actually, because you have a body of information that is common, now you can actually have a real conversation, as opposed to sort of hyper personalized statements where you don't have enough understanding of what someone else is saying to where you could even repeat what it was that they were saying.
I mean, I agree, and I would say, a couple things. One is you learn much more from listening than you do from
Yeah,
talking.
yeah.
And that's something that I had to learn. I'm a very talkative person. I mean, I'm an introvert, but in a one-on-one situation, I can talk a mile a minute. I just don't like, which is typical, as I've read, of introverts, as opposed to they like to talk. Like I like to talk to you about have a deep conversation about something that could go all day, right? But
Oh yeah.
but in a crowded room with people just talking about small talk, I can't really get with.
Oh yeah.
So,
I can't deal with small talk, man.
anyways,
I do not have the chops for small talk, man. I can't do
but whatever. But I mean, but yeah, but I mean, listening, I had to learn that. Like, I had to learn that. What's one of the things I learned on the Basie band? I'll never forget. I was when I first joined the band. Byron, who actually recommended me for the band.
I trust that you've enjoyed the video so far. Please subscribe, comment, share, like, and also you can go over to my Patreon. The link is in the description if you'd like to further support. Thank you. Now back to the video.
We knew each other from Eastman School of Music, and he walked on the bus, and I walked on behind him, and he went 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your seat, and he just kept walking to the back where he was sitting. Right, so I sat down, and I was sitting. What I later found out was I was sitting in the quote unquote executive section. And a lot of the cats didn't want to sit up there with the road manager, but I dug it, because it was a history lesson. So one time the road manager, Sonny Combe, was talking to Eric, I think, about, some logistics about something. And I was listening, and so I made a suggestion. Okay, I said, well, you could do this. And Cup just turned around and said, your job, young man, is to sit down, be quiet, and play second alto. And I said, okay. And, I learned from that because after that, I found many instances where I was listening to their conversations and I thought I had ideas, right? But I didn't express them. I just kept listening. And then I found out that there were many other things that I didn't know that were factoring in to their decisions. And I realized why they were making the decisions. It wasn't because they hadn't thought of my idea. It was because they, so that was one of the first examples. And I really do feel like I work on that. That's something I work on with myself to this day, is to listen. And when you talk about music, it's so important. And I think that's one of the things that, you can play. There are plenty of guys that can play rings around everything, man. Unbelievable technicians. But I don't really, I don't like to, to me, I don't go to hear somebody play what they practiced. I don't really want to hear that. I want to hear music. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in practice.
Oh yeah.
You have to, I believe that you have to practice your instrument. You have to work on learning how music works, rhythm, harmony, melody, all these kinds of things. That's a general term I use for all those things, because it doesn't have to be cognitive theoretical knowledge. You can have an understanding of how music works that's totally oral, knowing what to play, when, and why. Okay, that's how music works. And then being creative, right? So I kind of teach in those 3 areas. I implore my students to practice those 3 areas every day, because if they don't practice their instrument, they're not going to be able to play what they want to play. They don't want their instrument to be in the way. But if they only practice their instrument, then they're not going to have enough of an understanding, as you say, to be able to play what the music needs. And the music, that's a very vast term. The music, man. That could be so many things. You know what I mean? Like, you play with Aretha Franklin, that's one thing that the music needs, right? You play with the Basie Band, that's another thing. You play with Reggie Workman, that's another thing. You play the Glazunov, that's a whole nother thing, right? So, all these things, and it's so vast, so it's really important to have those skills, but then it's also really important to listen. And I agree with you. I think that is with politicians, and in many areas, I think, where people haven't experienced, the collective, collaborative, we're, part of a whole experience of making music. They don't really understand the value of that, listening and timing, like right thing at the right time. Some people were great at that. Martin Luther King comes to mind, sort of perfect, and there are a lot of people who do get that. They are in touch with their audience. They are improvising relative to what's happening, so that can happen, but it's right now. We're at a crucial moment right here. This is a moment. It's one of those moments, I think, that there is the possibility for change. I think when you speak about words are something that people are very, very, focused on right now. What he said. Did you hear what he said? Oh my goodness. You know what I mean? Or posturing, where they're always saying the right things. I think words are important, but I think they're very important, but I think words are not actions. Words help
Yeah.
people become active, but words are not a replacement for action. And we should make sure that, as we begin to, wherever the people and the country are moving towards now, and I hope it's a better place, um, you know, I think that it's very important for people to realize that the fight for right, I mean, whatever your definition of that is never going to be over. It's constant, it's
Right.
constant that we're working to better, because humans are fallible. We're all imperfect. It's human
Yes.
nature. All you have to do is talk about history. All you have to do is look at history, and you'll realize that nothing is really new. I mean, we keep doing the same things. And if we don't learn from history and change patterns, we're going to have a hard time growing. So I think we're at a point now where everybody's very excited, and I think that's great. I'm all for it. But I think that we need to understand what's happening now as a first step in a sequence or a series of consistent and word I'm looking for. Just we cannot let up. We have to be consistent, and we have to evolve. It has to go to a different level of the next level after the level of outrage and the level of vocalization and the level of organization. Okay, well, the next level, right, is about legislation, change, and not just legislation, but cultural change, because I think you can't really legislate morality. You know what I mean? I'm a big believer that people have to change. People have to be accountable for their part in what we are living in and what we have created on this planet. They have to be accountable for their actions, even if they weren't aware of them. It doesn't really matter. It's not about fault and blame in most cases. It's about understanding oneself and trying to change, and listening to other people and learning about how what you say or what you do, regardless of its intent, is being interpreted. That's important. It's not about right or wrong. It's about understanding, and it's about growth. So I think when we talk about, for example, systemic racism that's been here for like 400 years, that's certainly, legislation is a good thing that can help in certain areas, but it's not really going to change unless people start to change. And I think that that's what I'm hoping for. And we'll never change them all, but I mean, I'm hoping for, actually, we don't change anybody, people change themselves. So anyways, I'm getting into a whole nother thing again, but that's
Oh
fine.
no, that's totally fine. You know, this thing about, you can't legislate morality. Obviously you can put penalties in place for certain behavior to curtail it. But I take your point, and people have to be willing to make uh, good individual decisions. You treat people like individuals. You treat them like uh, uh, you don't have to see each person as having some baggage associated with them. You
Mhm,
see them for the person they are,
mhm.
and if they need help, or if you can do something to set them up in a certain way, do it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pontificating and
Mhm.
shouting, and I'm all for peaceful protest, but you know protesting is just talking. I want to see some acting.
Yeah.
So so I'm very much the same in thinking about, okay, we're doing this thing right now, but what is this thing going to actually turn into, and how we're going to actually get some things to happen,
Mhm.
and it not just be like, hyper frustration due to quarantine.
Right. Exactly. Due to people out of work and frustrated about a whole lot of things. And then,
Right.
not that this isn't valid thing to be outraged by all this,
Of
this
course, of course, of course, of course. Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and that's good. But again, like you said, and I would even say it's protesting is almost, I would even say it's talking, I would even say it's asking. Okay.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Asking
yeah.
for change. Okay, that's number one, right? Where maybe it's a little stronger than that. It's demanding, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we
right.
are we are strongly asking for change. Um, but again, if this fire that's been going on for a couple of weeks now of protesting, eventually it's going to the protests are going to whittle out. And the question is, what happens then? Because if it just dies out and we go back to normal, then what's the point? We have to
Right.
take we have to take it to the next step, and that's trickier. I mean, it has to stay. I mean, if you think about, any real change in this country has come from the people. People always talk about, well, we need a better leader. Well, we do need a better leader, but our current leader was elected. So, I mean, we can argue all day about how that happened. And, but the point is that he, to me, is a symptom of our situation. Okay. So, if you want to look at it that way, I mean, some people think he's a very good leader, but I think that, when leaders arise, they arise out of the people wanting change. I mean, politicians, let's face it, we've got politicians now that are speaking out and aligning themselves with this movement in ways that we haven't seen these politicians saying these things at all. Like, well, how come they weren't saying those things before all of this?
That's always my thing. I'm sorry. I'm a realist,
Right.
and it's always my thing that, okay, so you guys are all saying this. I never heard anybody talking like this.
Hmm.
None of you guys were talking like this.
Hmm.
So my thing is always, why why now? So are you afraid now? Are you afraid of losing political capital? Are you afraid that if you don't align yourself a certain way that you're not going to be able to get the votes? Or is this like, are you doing this for the right reasons? And then if you are doing it for the right reasons, what took you so long to get to that point? And why did it have to be this event taking place? This series of events taking place that caused it. Uh, you know, you're talking about our current leader, the current president. Um, it's interesting because I think that he was a response to something.
Hmm.
He was a response to something, um,
Surely.
and I don't I, see. I don't like this. I don't like this sort of. Um, I'm a third party guy,
Hmm.
so I don't like this idea of only having these two competing, groups, because what ends up happening is you only have topics that each one of those groups has decided are going to be their topics. These are going to be our talking points. These are the ones that um, we focus grouped, you know,
Hmm.
the way that these, play out. And if we really focus on saying these talking points, then our pollsters are telling us that, it's going to work out. And I think it also, creates a situation where there's not a lot of listening. It's more about being on agenda. Like,
Hmm.
I need to keep saying this stuff because I need to see that needle move in a certain way. And even if a third party candidate doesn't get elected, at least aspects of their platform, if they are seen as being, received well by people, people are like, hey, they're really talking about these particular perspectives, then those things can be combined. But if we don't even give the third party candidates a chance, even to, say anything at all, then I wonder if we're ever going to get to a place where politicians are really listening to each other
Yeah.
and
I mean,
trying to like make deals and trying to yeah, I don't know.
yeah, I mean,
That's
it's tough, man. I mean, there's no doubt that, we are at a time right now where the two parties are extremely polarized. I mean,
yeah,
it's very, and the people are have been polarized. Although this recent movement is actually causing some change, it's causing some people at least to come together along and sort of across some of the types of divisions that are being put out there as existing. You know what I mean? And I think that that's good. I mean, I would say that politicians. It's hard to know. They are basically working. They basically should be representing the people. And the people are unified, right? But here's the thing: when the people start to, you talk about, are they just trying to protect their interests? Well, in some ways they are, right? I mean, but in some ways maybe they weren't speaking out because they didn't feel like they had the people behind them. But now that the people are
right. I
showing,
see.
so I mean, we don't really know, man. We can't go
Yeah,
inside somebody's head and see. I mean, this is where we're talking about like character assessment. Like what Martin Luther King talked about, like the content of someone's character. We have gotten to the point, I feel, as as humans in this country, as Americans, where people have become completely unable to assess character in another person. Like, and so they are using so often um, other criteria. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, be it skin color, be it nationality, be it whatever, be it political party. You know what I mean?
right, right, right.
And making a bunch of associative um, stereotypes that they then, again, because they don't want to research, they don't want to, even with political candidates, they don't want to research. I mean, when somebody's running on either party, do any of us really have time to investigate how did this person vote? Like on what type of legislation
Right, right, right.
vote from the time they were in the state legislature? Like that's the only
Yeah,
way to really know if this person is actually going to be supportive of the views that we have. I mean, part of it is time. We're all working so hard. The world is running faster and faster and everything. But because of these things, I think most people are followers. Some people think independently for themselves, and I'm a big advocate for that. But again, that requires research. That requires, that requires accountability. That requires humility. That requires
hmm,
learning. It requires a lot of things to develop independent thought. So, I think a lot of people are either too busy or, just are afraid or whatever it is. And so they're looking, and as you say, extroverts, we're introverts. So we like to be like on our own, thinking of our own thoughts. Most people like to be like with like kind, whether that's, along the lines of race or along the lines of just thought. You know what I mean? Like people like feel more comfortable around other people that agree with them. That's a natural thing. Nobody really
yeah,
likes conflict, most people. So, I think that what we've been seeing in our, political system recently is sort of this between the two parties is this sort of competition, this battle almost for those people to win those, to sway those people. And I guess it's always been that way, to a degree.
right.
But I think, I hope that now, man, we have a situation where we have people, actual people uniting across the country. That's a good thing, despite the fact that they may be spreading the COVID, with all this protesting. I mean,
Ah,
other than that, I think it's great because
right.
people of all kinds of different backgrounds are walking together. They're standing on their feet for hours at a time. They're talking to each other. They're unified in a cause.
Yeah.
They may not all really have exactly the same. Some of them are against brutality. Some of them are against systemic racism. If you really boiled it down, you might find that some of them are not against systemic racism. They're just against this brutal guy killing this person. Whatever.
Right.
I mean, whatever. I mean, that's always like that. Like people have to come together for change and for movement forward. And I think that's happening. I mean, you said something interesting before, which reminded me to get us back to music. You said, and it reminded me of like, sort of like in politics, there's an action and then there's a reaction. So it's almost like our current president is a reaction, you know what I mean, to
Right.
some action, right? And so in music, I often explain in improvisation and creativity and group play to my students. I talk about, and this is just from my own experience of sort of figuring out how to navigate situations. I think about act, react, interact. So I challenge them, and that's regardless of style, right? Because if we're playing with the Basie band, there will be times where we're acting, we're taking an action, and other people are reacting. There'll be times where we're reacting to something else. There'll be times where we're interacting, certainly. And if you're playing with Reggie Workman, man, and Andrew Surreal, you know, they're just playing like, it's like, okay, we're just going to start playing, then, you know, it's the same thing, right? You hear something, you react to it, someone else reacts to that. Maybe at some point you kind of take the lead, and this can be done in any style. So, you know, I think these kinds of ideas that some of us musicians are kind of, it's what we do, you know. I think the world, I think it would be good. That's one of the reasons I believe music and art, you know, should be taught to everyone, just the same way we teach everyone math and reading.
Yes.
Not everybody becomes a writer, not everybody becomes a mathematician, but we understand that there's a value in the development of the brain with these two skills. And I think that we've really gotten away from that. At times there was more. I'm a product of that. I went to a junior high school that had an arts-based curriculum. I was told by my band teacher years later that the principal came to him, this was a few years before I got there, and said, listen, he's a drummer. He said, listen, if you were to design a curriculum for middle school, what would it look like? You know, the principal asked the musician, okay? And they had this, and we had art, we had chorus, we had drama, and these junior high school kids were doing all these different things, and a whole bunch of them went to specialized, you know, academic high schools, like and passed a bunch of tests. And a lot of us went into music. So, you know, if I hadn't had that, I probably wouldn't be a musician. I had an elementary school teacher named Mr. Scott who played trumpet. You know, I wanted to play saxophone in the 4th grade, and they didn't have any saxophones. So he said, well, we don't have a saxophone, son, but you could play the cello. So I said, okay, I'll play the cello, you know. So that's my first instrument was the cello. That was Mr. Scott, African-American trumpet player, you know. And he was teaching school and conducted the orchestra. We had an orchestra. And, you know, later, as I grew into musician, I stayed in contact with him. He found out that, you know, he was playing a lot of shows and stuff, and you know, but, you know, of course, he was the subject of much discrimination. You know, this would have been in the 60s, you know. So very interesting things that play into an individual's development, right, as a child, that as you grow up, you meet these people, which is why, you know, my parents, my father sent me to public school in New York City, PS 33, which was, we grew up in, we lived in what was kind of a middle income housing project, and across the street was what they called lower income housing projects. Naturally, you can imagine what the demographic divide was there, but the school was right in the middle, and this of course was in the 60s, and the idea was that the kids would go to school together, which my parents sent me to their school. You know, naturally, As we got to the third grade, many of the white parents began to pull their kids out of the school for no I mean, it wasn't violent. It wasn't any more, you know, there weren't guns and knives and stuff, and you know, and so it became sadly less of that. But my father and my parents left us in that school. He later told me he felt like that there was more um, greater value in the education there than besides just cognitive learning. And so it's interesting to me
Right.
when I look back at how I developed as a person and what I went into, Sean. You know what I mean? Because I was from the time I was in the sandbox, I was with all kinds of mixed races and kids. Um, not necessarily that I was super friends, but I always had friends, from the, and then I went to this arts-based junior high school. And so I know, and I mean, I don't know, I guess I feel, a lot of people don't like to talk about race, but I feel like if we don't talk about it, it's never going to change. So, I feel that, I know a lot of other white musicians who ask me questions like, man, what was it like to play with the Basie band and be the only white guy, man? It was beautiful, man. It was no problem. You know what I mean? Everybody was treated me beautifully. I always felt I always felt comfortable. I always felt people are people. And I think a lot of the reason that I could feel that way was because I was brought up from the time I was very small. I had interactions with and role models with of different people of color and of different backgrounds and of different um, nationalities. And while I think that taught me that you cannot make a judgment about a person, right? Because I knew, I mean, look, man, I got mugged by people too in New York. You know what I mean? So, but I knew that I couldn't say, hey, man, all these black people are muggers. You know what I mean? And I can't be afraid of every black person I meet because I knew plenty of black people who were intelligent and who were beautiful to me and were just like everybody else. So you have to start to look at these problems that we have, whatever it is, as not being, you can't draw lines along these kinds of things like race or this kind of thing. People do it, but most of the time they do it because they live in isolated situations. They don't have any contact,
Hmm.
and fear and ignorance and media stereotypes and 400 years of stereotype bullshit. Excuse me. I probably you might have to bleep that out.
It's all right, man. It's
I'm
all
getting a
right.
little getting too street on us, but
It's all right.
anyway,
You said something. What was it? You were talking about people asking you like what is it like being the only white guy in the Basie band or whatever. And I interviewed Aaron Goldberg,
okay,
and we have an interesting connection because we were both selected for that Stan Getz Clifford Brown Fellowship thing same year.
nice,
And so that's when we met, like 27, 28 years ago, whatever it was.
cool.
And so catching up on that was pretty cool. But one thing that he was talking about is he has found himself in a lot of situations where he's the only white guy.
Mhm.
And one thing that black culture uh, is known for is as long as you're into what we're into, as long as you have embraced an aspect of the culture, we're going to treat you like family. Now, we might talk about you.
About everybody, though. You talk
Yeah, right. Right.
that's the
But
ultimate.
yeah, that's right. But but we are very accommodating in in Aaron. I'm paraphrasing, but it's the thing where if if you can play, then what that means is that you've spent countless hours researching, practicing black music, and that shows that you that you're in this for the same reason that we're in it. Yeah.
And I would say
So,
that has been, I mean, look, there's always, like I said, life is complicated. People are complicated. Everybody's, young people especially, are trying to figure things out. So but my experience, overwhelmingly has been exactly that, Sean. Welcoming, and again, I think, I think it is because of the way I play. I think it is a
oh
compliment
yeah,
to my musicianship, and I take it as such. I remember one time a friend of mine, Kurt Weiss, another White Cat trumpet player, and I were asked to come up to jam at a place up in Harlem. Okay, so we went up there, and a little bit nervous. It's like, okay, as the people tell you, man, don't go up there, man. This is what people tell you. But we went up there. We went to this place. We knocked on the door. Person opened the door and said, "Hey, you guys must be musicians." Maybe figure what other white cats would be up here. But the point is that they said, "You guys must be musicians. Hey, come on in. Whenever you come up here, come up anytime you want. This is your table." I had a table there, right? Y'all just hang out here, have whatever you want, play some music, you know. And we went up, we played some music, and it's just incredible, man. You know what I mean? What people will tell you that isn't really even based in experience or truth. It's based in fear. You know what I'm saying? And to get you to be afraid. And then when you are afraid, then you are not yourself. And
yeah. It's a,
this is, one of the problems that people have, I think.
it's interesting because I think it goes the other way too. Because I grew up in the country, on a dirt road, you know, cow pasture, 80-acre cow pasture behind our house. I grew up with horses and four wheelers and go karts and all of that.
Nice.
And it's on a dirt road. It's still a dirt road. It's still the house that my parents live in. And we were one of the only black families. And the school I went to, we were one of the only black families that went to that school. And certainly, there were, I had certain experiences. I could count them probably on one hand. But on balance, the experience in that school system was very good. Um, you know, it wasn't a top-ranked school system, but there was good teachers, and the teachers did a good job, and it was, for the most part, I didn't have any issues with classmates or anything. And it's interesting because some of my friends, some of my black friends from other school, systems or whatever, when I'd have them come out to the house, uh, they would scare themselves because they're riding down a dirt road. Maybe it's at night,
Yeah.
and like, hey, I know there's nobody that looks like me out here, and there was some of that, and even in my decision to move to the area, this suburb of Columbus, which kind of was sort of a rural suburb of Columbus, my decision to move where we moved, I had people, tell me, hey, are you sure you want to move there because there's a history of X, Y, and Z or whatever, and people, I think, maybe they mean well. Maybe they're just so afraid themselves that they're just spreading their fear. But I think the thing that helps the most is just to have conversations and just to try to do some things that are outside of your comfort zone so that you have more of these experiences, and then you just have more information to make decisions about what kind of people you're dealing with. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think look, I don't want to, I don't want to equate my situation as a white person being welcomed into the African American community with your experience of going the other direction. Because although I appreciate, and I will agree that there are good people, and that people
Yeah.
want to be good, and that I think most people, when I talk about those middle followers or whatever, most people want to be good. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
And you're in a way, man, sounds like, your parents, man, are like pioneers, man. They were brave pioneers. We need people, and yourself as well, man, because that's the only way we're ever going to change, is when people can experience things and see what they have in common, instead of focusing on what they perceive as differences and what they associate with those differences, right? So, I mean, that's a beautiful thing, man. And, I applaud you and your parents, because I think that and there's been many people who have done that. And there's been systemic, intent to prevent that as well, in terms of people being able to move into neighborhoods. There's all kinds of, I mean, we all know about real estate
Oh
manipulation,
yeah. Yep.
and and property value, and this kind of thing. And it's just all, that's what I mean. All of that has to change. It just,
Yeah.
we won't change it all, because there's always going to be some that just believe that, I think. But
But
perhaps
that's such a that's such a, it's such a minority of people actually
I
that
agree.
are, that I think if we want to go in a certain direction, I think in general, I think people are going to go with us.
I agree with that. And I think part of it is power. It's a minority of people who have manipulated themselves into positions of power. And then it's people allowing themselves to be manipulated, in terms of the decisions they make and the things they believe, and the privileges that they have and the comfort level that they associate with certain things. But look, man, that's the way the shit happened in Germany too. Okay, like
Mm.
that's the people were downtrodden, and it started out as, yeah, we're going to rev up the economy, and I mean, and then at the end they're like, oh my God, it got to the point where they couldn't resist. Now, hopefully, we're not going to get to that point, and it looks like we are resisting, which is promising. And well, man, I didn't think we were going to talk about all that, but then again, I never,
It's all right.
when I take out my horn, I never know what the music's going to be. So watch it.
It's 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 quite all right. Well, let's talk about maybe some projects, maybe a current release CD or something. Maybe you have, and maybe you can talk about, uh, talk a little bit about what led up to the CD and the concept behind it and all that.
Yeah, so I have a new CD that's just recently come out. It's called Hypocrisy Democracy, strangely enough. And, it didn't start
It's
out to,
perfect. It's a perfect segue.
yeah,
It's perfect.
well, I guess, and that's kind of the way I've always lived my life. It's like I just let it flow, and it is what it is. And that's kind of how this evolved too, because it didn't start out with that title. It wasn't like I'm going to make a record about this. How the way it evolved is, you know, actually, since working with the Basie Band again, I was able to allocate some resources to, 'cause I hadn't made a CD in a while, to kind of putting out some projects. So my hope was to put out a few of differing kinds of things, which is of course on hold now, since we're all on hold. We don't have there's no work, but hopefully that'll all be coming back soon, and we'll keep that moving. So this project, I had been working at the New School I've been working there for about 24 years or so. And there's a lot of, working musicians that live in the New York area that teach there. And I had been working at school, mostly in kind of curriculum work and, sort of committees and stuff with some different musicians. The three musicians on the record. So Andy Milne, the pianist, he's now in Michigan, but he got a full-time position there. But he was at the New School. Matt Wilson, the drummer, and Ben Allison, the bass player. So we've been working together, we're talking all the time, and we never played together. So I said to myself, well, we should get to know each other. Like, now that we know each other, we should really get to know each other, play some music. So I got us a little gig at Smalls, which actually you can check out on the archive there. And my idea behind it was that this was going to be what I called virgin music, okay, in the sense that we
Hmm.
weren't going to rehearse, we weren't going to rehearse at all. We were just going to play for the first time together in the place. Um, and we had a little bit of a framework. We talked a little bit about, because they wanted to be sure, because we hadn't played together before, and I think they felt like, well, man, well, I don't want you, don't start calling these Bud Powell tunes. You know what I mean? If I don't know the tune, right? Which I
Hmm.
was never intending to do. So we talked a little bit about some standards that we knew, but we didn't talk at all about how we were going to do them or anything like that. And so we went in and we played the gig, was really very well received. I enjoyed it. We all enjoyed it immensely. And that was a few years ago now. And I said to myself, wow, I should record this group. This is nice, and it's a little bit different than what I'm known for, which is, like I said, I've always played all kinds of music. I'm just not really known for, I'm known for certain things, if I'm known at all, so being a bebopper or being in the Basie band or whatever, So, so that's how that happened. And then finally, I got it together and we recorded. So we went and recorded, and instead of doing standards, Ben was like, "Well, man, let's record your tunes, man. We should record your tunes." So this time we did get together a couple times, and run through the tunes. Not a lot. We didn't play any gigs. We just ran through the tunes a couple times, and then we went in and made the music. I kind of felt like for this music, that was important because with these musicians, the concept of the record was really about sort of act, react, interact, sort of communal, collaborative playing. There are sections on the record that are free, improvised, out of tempo, different things like that. And so it was a lot of fun. And it just so happened that tunes that I composed, the titles, and many of them were composed a long time ago. Freedom, Justice, It's Nothing New. Um, what else is on there? And some other compositions of mine. Uh, but, after we recorded them with all the things that were happening in America, it just seemed, it just kind of, that title just came to me. Actually, the original title was Democracy's Hypocrisy, but somehow it got changed to Hypocrisy, Democracy. So um, I went with that. And yeah, man, and Andy Milne recommended a guy actually out in Ohio that did some of the artwork for me on that. And he's done some really great, put together a video with some really good imagery. So it's kind of became, it, like I said, it kind of evolved into that, just sort of out of what was happening. And I was 100% sure that if different things had been happening in America, I don't think I would have been compelled to do that, And it's important for me to say, too, that it wasn't really meant to be a political record in terms of being aligned with this particular political party or anything like that. I know it's probably interpreted like that, but that was not the intent. In fact, the intent is more about um, independent thought, about people really looking at the history, about the definition of words, about what justice means. Justice to some people, means the right to kill somebody. You know what I mean? Because they pissed you off. Freedom
Hmm.
means to some people the freedom to do whatever you want to whomever you want whenever you want. You know what I mean? But to other people, freedom means the freedom of choice, freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the freedom, justice means equal opportunity. So it's really sort of meant, as a challenge for people to look inward and to kind of ask themselves these questions. Again, with the objective of independent thought, like ask what do these words mean to you? You know what I mean? And I think the music kind of reflects the different, the complexities of how we are, and how we think and how we evolve. And it's not just one thing through the whole record. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you're going along, man, with a nice groovy thing, and all of a sudden you, you're into some other stuff. Hey, welcome to Earth, right? I mean, this is what it is. So that's kind of how that one happened. And I'm not sure what's going to happen from here with it, but we did get some really nice reviews and a couple of interviews. I was kind of hoping that you know there might be some opportunity to talk a little bit about these kinds of things. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. And again, like, so
Absolutely.
that was that project that just happened. And then I am hoping to do some other projects. I had some different ideas. And again, one guy asked me in an interview, it's like, well, this is really different than what you've done before. Is this kind of like, can we expect more stuff like this? I said, you can expect more of the unexpected, you know.
Okay.
Um, I don't know that, I'm not really looking to abandon, and again, to me, this music is not um, a departure. Maybe in some ways it is, but it's only in the sense that it's departure from the way people know what people know of me and my music. It's not a departure to me. It's really just a broader view. You know what I mean? An evolution, perhaps. And it wouldn't be surprising to have a record that was more. Um, I don't know. I don't like labels and I don't like categories. I don't like that kind of stuff. But I got some other ideas. Roots and branches, and do some different things. So we'll have to see. But I don't decide ahead of time. I'm a very kind of like I find like I play music best when my mind is completely free and I haven't decided what I'm going to do. Even with the Basie band,
Mm.
I just try to stay in the moment. I've found in my experience that when performing, the mind is a terrible thing to use. And I,
Mm.
I, I find that when practicing, the mind is a very important thing to use. I mean, when you're practicing, you need to use your conscious mind to assess what it is you're doing, to strategize, to find the areas that need, like the three I's: identify, isolate, integrate. You know what I mean? In terms of what's not happening here and what needs to happen, right? But you do all that practice, and then when it comes to playing, you just listen, and you got to let all those things do their do their thing. You got to let all the work that you've done do do its job, and you become the instrument that the music flows
Yes.
through. But it doesn't always happen the way you want to. But I've found that I don't control that. You know what I mean? If it doesn't happen, then that just means that it's not ready yet. You know. And whenever I tried it, whenever I get upset, when I was younger, I'd get upset. And because I didn't like the way music was going, and I try to make it better. I never forget one of my mentors, Leroy Williams, a drummer uh, with Barry Harris for so many years. I told him, I said, man, I get frustrated sometimes when I'm playing these gigs, man, and sometimes I'm playing and everything is swinging, man, everything is good. Sometimes no matter what I do, I can't make it swing. He said, well, man, that's where you're messing up. You can't make it swing. You need to let it swing, you know?
Mm.
And I didn't know what he meant at the time. I was like, what the heck does that mean? But as time went by, I began to, that's why I think it's so important for us to stay in touch with elders, and mentors, because oftentimes what they say to us, we don't understand. That's okay. Just put it in your pocket, you know. If you don't understand it or if you object to it, just say, okay, put it in your pocket, check it out. Because as you go down the road, you may see, and that's what happened to me. I'll be like, now I understand.
You know,
Another thing he told me,
I
go ahead.
yeah, I interviewed one of my teachers, uh, the teacher I had for my undergrad and my master's degree, Trent Keniston, and it was one of those times where, I had the opportunity to say thank you for so many of those lessons. for so many of those things that he said and so many approaches that he had that I didn't totally understand. I just went with it because I respected it. But later it's like, oh snap, yeah, I get it now.
Hmm.
So that was a really nice, it was a nice moment to be able to tell him what I thought about him all
Amen.
these
And
years.
and that's something that's important for us to remember as teachers, to remember what it was like to be young, because I had a similar experience. Um, when I was in college with my teacher, I was not getting along with his approach and style, and actually changed teachers. But years later, I realized, and I spoke to him about it too, and I really am impressed. His name Raymond Ricker. I'm really impressed because, he didn't hold a grudge against me, for switching teachers at that time, and I understand now how he understood me then, and later on when I called him for some advice on applying for a job, he was very forthcoming and very helpful and very supportive. And, I had the opportunity to thank him and to let him know that now that I'm teaching young people who are very often, um, you know, in opposition with my ideas that I'm trying to share with them, and things I'm asking them to practice, um, that I now have realized, that what he was asking me to do was helpful, and I did it. You know what I mean? So, and I realize the value of it now. So, I think that's so important, on so many levels, man. Really.
I wanted to say something else about Eastman. So Byron Stripling. So you said that uh, what did he suggested you for the Basie gig?
Yes, he was on the Basie band, and he and I went to Eastman School of Music together,
Yeah.
and we used to play together there, and he went out on the road. So when I got the call from Frank Foster, I mean, he was the only person that I knew on that band.
Yeah.
So, he recommended me for the band, and, that was, I'm forever grateful to him for that, because, that experience, I mean, I was working at the time, I was working for playing lead alto with Illinois Jaquette's band. And I remember Byron came in to see us at the Blue Note, and I had no idea, that, I guess later I surmised that, he was checking me out or whatever, making sure that, he wanted to make that recommendation. Um, but we knew each other, and he's I love Byron, man. Byron is such I have such admiration for Byron. He he has never stopped practicing, never stopped achieving, never stopped. I mean, it's so admirable. When he was on the Basie band, he was a great lead trumpet player. I mean, man, one of the best, ever. And he always wanted to do other things. He always wanted to do more. He always wanted to move himself, better himself. And he did that. He learned how to sing, and he played Louis Armstrong in the show, and he's built this great career now at the Columbus Jazz Orchestra and now the Pittsburgh Symphony. So I often use Byron as an example to my students in one of my classes. I teach senior seminar, where we look at where they take in their final semester, where they look at income streams, and they sort of identify their artistic visions, and they try to put together a 1, 3, 5 year plan on what they want their next steps to be. And I often use him as an example of what can be done if one
Yeah.
really applies oneself. One really is unafraid to face one's fears. One is motivated. One is unafraid to learn new skills. All these kinds of things that are so hard to do. I find them hard to do. I've never been able to do all that, but I have a lot of respect and admiration for him, and am still thankful to him to this day for that recommendation. And He's hard to get in touch with nowadays, but maybe you can no.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell him you said hey.
Yeah.
He's this was the first year, but he was teaching jazz trumpet at Ohio State.
Oh, great.
So it was great working with him. It was a great opportunity for me to repay him for not only having recommended me for the Basie band, but for all of the years of hiring me to play in the CJO.
Yeah.
Really generous dude.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then another person from Eastman that I interviewed Byron also for this. That
Gotcha.
is Pete Mills.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Pete Mills.
So
Yeah, Pete. I didn't know Pete as well as I know Byron. When was Pete there? Was he there at the same time I was?
so you may have. So where did you do your master's degree?
I know that name very well, but I'm trying to place Pete now, and I apologize, Pete, if
Where did you do your master's degree?
I did my master's at I did 6 years at Eastman from 80 to 86. I did my
Okay.
bachelor's and my master's there.
All right. So I think you were a graduate student when
Yeah.
Pete was an undergrad.
Okay, yeah. So I knew him, but I probably didn't have that much
Right,
contact.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he spoke very highly of you when I told him that I started playing with the Basie band, and he was like, you got to check out David Glasser, and
Wow.
he spoke very highly of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's and like again, I'm one of my faults is my memory, and especially with names.
Night Town.
Nighttown, there it is. Yes, sir. And so that's the place. Yeah, that's a great place, man. So much
Yeah,
fun.
it is.
Pretty regularly. So yeah, yeah, like what? By the time I was in my fifth and sixth year there, I was living off campus. I was kind of coming in and doing my thing, and I did, I always tried to be supportive with the younger musicians. So it's very, very nice to hear that that Pete felt positive because that's so important to me. And yeah, man, I hope we get to meet again and hang out, man.
Oh yeah, me too. I miss you, man. Miss our conversations. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to talk this way. Honestly, these starting as the quarantine interviews, uh, I've transitioned the naming into conversations with Dr. Thunder. But really, it's been an opportunity to reconnect with some folks and hopefully provide some positive, some positive content out there for people to watch and maybe to become inspired and to maybe learn a little bit more about my guests. I've only interviewed people that I admire and respect. I have so much admiration for you. I think you're such a terrific player, and again, and I appreciate the generosity. I've played in bands before where the other saxophone players were not helpful at all. They were kind of like, okay, you're in this for yourself, whatever, and they knew that there was some traps and some hidden trap doors and stuff, and they didn't say anything. So I've been in situations like that before, but so I don't take it lightly that you guys were so warm and generous, and you wanted me to sound good,
Oh yeah,
and
you
all
do.
of that. So I appreciate
Monster,
that.
man. You're a monster player, man, and your flute playing, man. Oh my God. I have to play that flute juice thing now, man, and I was sweating bullets, man. I was afraid to play that thing after hearing you play it, man. So if anybody ever get a chance to hear him play that, they should hear it. Well, I'm sure you have. Sean's a hell of a flute player and a great saxophone player as well. Well, man, I think Doug did a lot in that because I'm kind of concentrating on what I'm doing, and I know Doug always helps out,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is great, and I leave him to it. I try not to, I try not to give too much because I always feel like, when I'm sitting in a band like that, I got so much on my mind to just read the music.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You had a really good balance. I mean, it was a really good balance. I mean, you told me the stuff that you needed to tell me, and the stuff that was helpful for me, and and then the more we played together, you know,
Yeah,
the less that was necessary. So,
and I mean,
unless we were like pulling out a new chart or something.
that's all my thing is, what I like to hear when people come in the band is I'm whatever it is, even if it's in a big band like that, or even if somebody's sitting in with the quartet or whatever and they don't quite know the tune, I always like to try to communicate musically as much as possible. And I don't mind mistakes, you know what I mean, as long as people are listening, because mistakes are what creativity is made of, and mistakes are where we learn, So, if I figure with you, man, if I phrase something a little bit differently than it's written, it's only going to be one time, and the next time you're going to know it. You know what I mean? Because you're listening. And I would rather have you do it that way than me try to fill your head with a bunch of things. Because, well, personally, I don't like people doing that to me. Filling my head with a bunch of things. I'd rather just listen. And I know I'm gonna miss, but I'm like, I'll get it next time. Now I see how we're doing it. So, but it's great to know, man, that it really means a lot to me, man, to know that, because, you never know what people, his experiences with you, and you try to be, as helpful and as real and as true as you can, and you hope that it's a good experience for the others. And it was great having you in the band, man. Whenever we need a sub, man, you're always the first person out of my mouth to Scotty, So, I think, you did such a fabulous job, man. You're a fabulous soloist, and working in that section. And I'm sure there'll be more ahead too, because whenever we have, it's always great to have somebody that kind of, like you said, once you know the book, that's like, then you can just come in and do it. You know what I mean? And it's like we don't miss a beat. So we ain't been working, man. We had so much work canceled because of this thing. I mean, we were pretty busy. We had a bunch of gigs through the spring. We were supposed to be in Europe, so it's kind of a shame. But I guess we'll make it up when they get this whole thing figured out. And until then, I mean, it's rough on musicians out here, especially the ones that don't have teaching. And even those of us that do have teaching, they're expecting enrollments to be really much lower, and that might affect things for a lot of us. So we have to weather this as we've weathered things before. But the music will go on. Music has always existed in humanity since the very beginning. So I'm sure it will find a way to exist somewhere, somehow, no matter what happens. Sean Thunder Wallace will be out there playing. We know that.
Well, God bless you, and God bless your family, man.
Thank you so
And
much, and thank you again for having me, and thank you for doing this, man, because it's kind of like an oral history, as well. Like it's a beautiful thing because you're talking to musicians in a really candid and open way, and I think as time goes by, it's going to be valuable information, for people and for future musicians. Hopefully.
I hope so too.
Well,
All right, man.
you the best, my man, and to your young one, Moses, and all the great things that you do, man. Thank you so much.
All right, now have a good one, man.
You too.